Chess YouTube, in today's video, Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, is going to teach us a genius chess opening that you can use to win literally every single game that you ever play. And that is the opening a4 and then rook to a3, aka the banned gambit. Now, what is the idea behind the banned gambit? It's very simple. First of all, you're trying to literally get banned off chess.com. If you play this and you win, chess.com may consider banning you from their site. Now, beyond that, the idea is simple. You're sacrificing the rook on move 2, literally the fastest possible rook sack in the game. And the idea is to disrespect your opponent in the greatest possible way and then win the game anyway. So from here, your opponent takes the rook like this, bishop takes, and you take back on a3, knight takes. And from here, let's see how Magnus plays out this game and how he plays for a win despite being literally down the exchange on move 2. Move 3, sorry. All right, the opponent here, GM Solver. He's got a few different options. First of all, you can just go d5, seize control of the center, but that's kind of what Maggie wants in this game. So instead, GM Solver, he continues, knight to f6, intending a fast short castles. All right, Magnus, b3, intending the fianchetto. All right, and black does castle, short castles, and finally, bishop b2, pressuring the pawn on the e5 square. Not a bad idea at all. Black defends, rook e8. Maggie, knight c4, jumping in once again, pressuring this pawn, and once again, black does defend, knight c6. And now here, Magnus, he plays the move d3. What is the idea? Well, he sees d5 coming, and he wants d2 available as a square for that knight. So, black goes d5. d5 is the move. Classical chess here. Black playing very, very solid so far. Seizing control of the center squares, and white does retreat. Knight d2 played in the game. And so far, Magnus, his position looks very, very strange. Down the exchange, down development. His king is not castled yet. But of course, if there's anyone who can play for a win in this position, it's going to be Magnus Carlsen himself. All right, black goes d4, gaining some space. We have g3, intending bishop g2, and so on. It makes a lot of sense. Going e3 right now is not exactly the best idea, as the pawn on d4 controls that square. So instead, bishop g2, knight f3, and short castles is the play for white. All right, black, bishop e6, very logical, intending potentially queen d7, and trading off white's very important light square bishop on h3. From here, bishop g2, and then bishop d5, again, threatening the trade of bishops. All right, Magnus, knight g to f3, and then e4. So far, GM Solver playing the most classical and principled way possible, gaining space, controlling the center, trading off pieces, and so on. But let's see what happens. From here, Magnus, he trades on e4. We have d takes, knight takes, bishop takes, and finally, short castles. Now black, queen d5, flying in to the center, again, pressuring g2. Again, a very, very logical move. I mean, so far, GM Solver really giving us a very good lesson in how to play the opening here. He castles, brings out the rook, gains control of the center, pushes d4 and e4, brings the queen down. I mean, everything so far is literally just textbook play by black in this game. But again, Maggie, being the GOAT, is going to have some ideas here. All right, queen d2, the queen slides up, rook a d8, rook d1. Maggie here trying to pressure d4 with the rook and the queen. Now, h6, guarding g5. h3 for white, doing the exact same thing, and then queen to c5, pressuring c2. So again, so far, GM Solver playing absolutely flawless chess, having zero weaknesses. The rooks, the queen, the bishop, everything on perfect squares. But again, Magnus, he sees the threat, simply the threat on c2, and he just slides over. Rook c1, defends the pawn, and the game goes on. Rook d6, black playing the rook lift, maybe intending ideas like rook to f3 or g3, or perhaps rook e to d8. Now, Magnus, queen to f4. The queen suddenly flies in and enters the game. We have rook e7, defending f7 a little bit more. I mean, wasn't really a target yet, but black playing very, very careful so far in this game. And now Magnus, h4, gaining space, a move he likes to play in a wide variety of positions. And the idea is simple. You gain space, you set up certain ideas like potentially knight g5 later, which is risky right now, but could be an idea later in the game. Maybe even h5 ideas, sort of a little micro threat for later in the game. All right, black, a5, gaining space. And now Magnus, queen d2, the queen slides back and pressures d4 once again. Now black, rook d8, the rook slides back. Bishop f1, defends e2 a little bit more. And now queen to d5. Black having a little bit of pressure on that knight on f3, and how will Magnus respond? Well, he slides back with that knight. Knight to h2 is the move, and again, you may be a beginner watching this game wondering, why did Magnus sack the rook? Why did he slide back with the bishop, back with the knight? Well, that is why Magnus is rated over 3,200, and you are not, my friend. This guy is just on a completely different level. He's got his ideas. Trust me. Let's see as the game goes on. All right, Black, knight b4, flying in, pressuring c2 a little bit more, and Black sort of has the idea of trading on c2, giving up 2 minor pieces there for the rook and the pawn, which could be a threat. And Magnus, he sees this, he knows this. c3 is the idea, defending the pawn, but also gaining a little space on the queen side. And if Black trades, he will trade back on c3, threatening mates in one move on g7. So Magnus always finding ways in this game to make these little micro threats, even in a completely worse position like this one right here. Black does trade, and White takes back. Queen takes, keeping those queens on the board. He may be the greatest endgame player of all time, but even Maggie here knows that in this kind of position, you must keep those queens on the board, as without the queens, the game is just too simple, and you are simply down too much material. So, queen takes, keeps the queens on the board, and threatens mates in one move on g7, the audacity. Now, Black, how does he want to defend? In the game, Black here plays the move f6, a move that would make Ben Feingold himself blush. Ben Feingold, of course, not being a fan of this move, and it's easy to see why. This move right here simply weakens all of those light squares around the king, including f7, g6, h7, even h5 and f5 are a little bit weaker right now. And Magnus, he sees this and immediately jumps in with that knight. Knight g4 is the move, threatening potentially, in some cases, maybe a sacrifice on h6 or f6. For example, right now, there is sort of the threat, it's not good yet, but there is sort of the threat of, if Black were to waste a move, queen takes f6, the idea being, of course, the king and the queen are sort of lined up for that fork. Now, it's not a good idea yet, but it could be a threat later in the game. Black sees this, and therefore rook d6 is the move, defending f6 with one more piece. Black here, GM Solver, not taking any chances. He knows if he loses this game versus Magnus Carlsen with literally the banned gambit, I mean, he is going to absolutely lose it. Therefore, rook d6 defends f6. All right, now, Magnus, queen to e3, slides over with the queen, and shockingly, White here is setting up certain ideas like potentially a sacrifice on h6, if you can believe it. So, a little lesson from Magnus here. I mean, even when you're down, you always want to make little micro threats like this, whether it's the mate on g7, forcing out f6, the sacrifice on h6. I mean, there are a lot of gurus online who say, do not attack, do not create threats in the game, but that is just nonsense. In chess, I mean, you always want to make threats against the opponent in a safe way, like this, essentially, whenever you can. All right, Black here, queen to e6, slides back, and putting a little bit of pressure on that knight on g4. And Magnus here, what does he want to do? Do you go back to, say, h2, a very passive square for that knight? Oh no, Magnus here. The idea behind queen e3, knight g4 was, of course, the sacrifice, and he simply goes for it. Knight takes h6. Now, this move objectively is not the best idea, giving up that knight for 2 pawns with, I mean, an unclear attack is not exactly the way to go. If he had a stronger attack, it would be a very good idea. But here, not so much. But Magnus, again, sticking to his guns, putting as much pressure as possible on the opponent. He gives up that knight, Black takes, and White takes back on h6. Now, rook to h7. The rook slides over, defends the king side, pressures the queen, and of course forces that piece back. Now, queen d3, the queen slides back, and then knight d5, once again jumping in and pressuring the weak queen on the e3 square. Queen d2, the queen slides back, knight e7, the knight there does retreat, and then queen to c3, the queen slides up, pressuring both f6 and c7, and getting out of the way of the attack by the rook. Now, knight f5, the knight jumps in, Black here, defending c7 with the rook on h7, a very clever idea, and the knight is sort of threatening ideas like, potentially, knight takes h4 with the attack on the pawn, and from there, queen g4 ideas, and from there, the tables will turn, and the hunter will become the hunted. So Magnus here, he sees this and plays the very clever idea of bishop to h3, pinning that knight on f5 to the queen on e6. So Magnus here, I mean, even when he's down, the exchange plus the minor piece, he's always making these little micro threats, whether it's the pin, the pressure on f5, whatever it is. I mean, throughout the entire game, we're seeing over and over and over again him applying so much pressure against the enemy position. That is one of the keys to reaching whatever rating goal you have in chess, be it 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 plus ELO, whatever it is. Always try to make these threats like Maggie in this game. All right, black, queen d5, pressuring the long diagonal. And now here, Magnus, f3, blocking the diagonal and pressuring the bishop. And by the way, in case you're wondering, I've got a guy in my free online community, drmikechess.com, who insists I call Magnus Mr. Maggie Man. I don't know why, but it's just in my head today. So, Mr. Maggie Man blocking the bishop with the move f3 here. And how does black respond? So far in this game, I mean, keep in mind, GM Solver, this guy is no joke. I mean, despite Magnus playing the greatest troll opening ever, the banned Gambit, this guy, I mean, he really isn't a joke. He's quite a good player. And in this position, I mean, so far, up until here, he's played a phenomenal game of chess, playing very, very classical chess, defending against all the threats, all his pieces still on very good squares overall, very good centralization and so on. But in this position, on move 34, he finally blunders. Now, the right move here is not that hard to find, is rook c6, sliding over with the rook in this chess.com blitz game, attacking the queen, pressuring the rook on c1 via the x-ray attack, and so on. That would be a very, very simple, strong way to go. But instead, in this position, the move is knight d4, jumping in with that knight. And what is the problem with this move? It's very, very simple here. Mr. Maggie Man himself, he trades on d4, black takes, white takes, black takes, and now f takes e4. And look at this. The pawn on e4 is poisoned. If you take the pawn, bishop to f5 hits both of these rooks, and white wins the game on the spot effectively. So, here, the pawn cannot be taken, and Magnus finds himself, despite playing the banned Gambit, in an even endgame. And Magnus, of course, being the greatest endgame player ever, he's gonna be the favorite here. All right, black, rook g7, sliding over, pressuring g3. And Mr. Maggie Man, king to f2, defends g3 with the king. Now black, rook takes e4. Bishop g2 hits the rook and skewers the rook and the pawn on b7. The rook slides over, rook b4, defending b7. But now, rook c5, pressuring a5. Maggie Man, he knows in these rook endgames, the activity of the rooks is like the most important thing in the entire position. You cannot slide over and go rook b1 defend, or even rook to, say, c3. It is just too passive. That rook must be as active as possible, ideally attacking enemy pawns, and therefore rook c5 is the move, pressuring a5 right here. From here, black c6, defending c7 and b7 a little bit from the bishop. And now Maggie, he takes on a5, and black takes on b3. Now, rook a8 hits the king, king to c7, bishop f3, king e6, and now a5, gaining space on the queen side. Magnus, he knows in these endgames, you must push those pawns, and if white can win the pawn on b7, the pawn on a5 will be a very powerful asset. All right, black, rook a3, pressuring that pawn. Now h5, Magnus pushing both alpha 0 pawns on the queen side and the king side. Rook h7 blocks this pawn, g4, defends the pawn, king d6, bishop b4, hits the rook, rook h6, and now e3. Black, b5, gaining space and giving white the option of capturing en passant, but of course that would lose the rook on the a8 square. Therefore, that is not a good idea at all. Rook c8 slides over with the rook. Black takes on a5, rook takes, and now we have rook takes c6, winning that free pawn on the c6 square. King d5 is the move. King to f3. Rook a1. Rook c5 hits the king. King d6. And now rook takes b5. Now rook f1 hits the king on the f3 square. King to e2 is the move. Rook g1 hits the free pawn on g4. And now bishop f5 does defend. Rook h8, the rook slides back, but this turns out to be another critical mistake in this endgame. And the problem is now, after, say, rook to b6, there's going to be problems with the king and the rook. For example, if the king ever slides back to the back rank, that will be a skewer on the rook, and Maggie Man himself takes advantage of that right now with the move rook b6 hitting the king. We have king to e7, rook b7, king d6, and now rook f7 sliding over, pressuring f6. And now look at this, the white pieces. I mean, the pawns on g4 and h5, perfectly placed. The rook pressuring f7, the king ready to strike, and black's rooks really aren't doing that much. This one biting on granite, and this one very, very passive. Rook h6 defends the pawn, but again, a very passive defensive move. Now, king to f3, the king enters the game. Rook f1, king e4, rook a1, and now rook d7, the rook and the bishop and the king all synergizing absolutely perfectly, and the king is forced back. King to c5, rook d4, rook f1, rook d8, cutting off the king, rook c7, and now rook g8. King d6, rook e8, rook f2, rook e6. White here just playing with his food. King c5, bishop g6. Now rook f1, king d3, king d5, bishop f5, rook f2, and finally Mr. Maggie Man plays the move e4, achieving a very, very solid formation with his bishop being a giant pawn defending everything right here. King to c5, king e3, sharking around, rook f1, king e2, rook f4, and here Magnus finally makes a mistake. The right move is king to e3, continuing to shark around, but instead he plays the move e5. Now this move makes some sense. White here has the pin on the rook on h6. If black takes the pawn, white wins the rook and the game. But instead black here simply slides over, king d5, pressures that rook. We have e takes f6, and now here black has one single move to save the game. That is the move rook takes h5. The idea being, after rook takes, if white takes the rook, you take the bishop, and this endgame, shockingly, is going to be a draw. I mean, even if white could defend this pawn on, say, h5 somehow, the game would be a draw, as the f and h pawns, if the king is active like this, it leads to a draw. It's a drawn theoretical endgame. Now, instead of that, black in the game, he takes on f5. Sorry, wrong arrow. He takes on the f5 square. Rook takes f5. We have g takes, and then rook takes h5. But this position is a one endgame for white. Rook to a6, rook takes, rook a5, and from here it's all over. The king is going to slide over. The rook takes the rook. The king takes the rook. f7, and the game will be completely won for white. And for that reason, in this position, Maggie Man has won, and his opponent, GM Solver, is forced to resign on the spot to his banned gambit opening, a4, and then rook a3. And that is how Magnus teaches us an opening you can win, you can use to win literally every game of chess, assuming you are as good as Maggie Man himself in this game. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please comment down below and smash that like button. And if you're wanting to learn directly from me, a 2000 ELO player, and how to get better at chess and finally reach a 1,000, 1,500, even 2,000 plus ELO rating, you can go to drmikechess.com. It's my free online chess community where I have courses for you, group coaching. You can DM me, literally DM me. I'll respond. We can talk about how to get you improving at chess ASAP and so on. So if you want to improve very, very fast, that is what you do. I'll see you inside drmikechess.com. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video.